Hi, welcome everybody to Acing the Interview. I am your host, Chanel Davis, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it and let my guests introduce themselves. We'll start with Mike Swift.
Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Swift. I'm the CEO and co-founder of this little outfit called Major League Hacking. We're an organization whose mission is to empower hackers. So we spend every single day working with developers, designers, makers, giving them all the tools and resources they need to build really amazing technology and learn really cool technical skills. We're mainly known for our work helping put on hackathons on university and high school campuses all over North America and Europe. So if you're currently a university student somewhere in the US, Canada, UK, or maybe anywhere in mainland Europe, you may have been to one of our events, which is pretty cool. And I'm really, really excited to be here today to talk about interviewing and all of the things that I've learned from helping hackers for many years to find really amazing jobs and internships. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And then next, I'm introducing Eddie Washington.
Hi, my name is Eddie Washington. I'm the recruiting lead for Genius.com. Genius is the internet's biggest musical lyrics database. If you ever want to come and find fun facts about the most popular hip hop songs or pop songs, that's what we do. And I recruit for sales and engineering and general administrative roles and video roles. So I've kind of recruited for it all. So happy to help answer questions.
Yeah, and then our last guest is Will Blaze.
Hi, everybody. I'm Will Blaze. I am a senior technical recruiter here at Peloton. Peloton is a fitness company. We're a fitness startup. We're about 6 years old. Our main product is a stationary bike that has an Android tablet on it. So you could take spinning classes wherever you are. We also have an iOS app, and we're working on a lot of fun things like a web app in the coming year. So I hire for mainly engineering, but I also work with product. I work with marketing. I work with hardware, and it's a really exciting place to be. And thanks for having me here.
Yeah, of course. So I guess my first question is just like, all of y'all went to college. I peeped your LinkedIn. So how did you find yourselves? Like, what did that journey look like from college to where you are at now? And then we'll start with Swift again.
Cool. Yeah, so I actually did not start out as a hacker, believe it or not. I actually went to university with the idea of being a lawyer one day. So I was studying political science, and kind of my journey to where I am actually does kind of start right around then when I went off to university. Before that, I'd been mowing lawns in my parents' hometown is like my gig. While my friends were all waiting tables at restaurants and things like that, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And time came to go to college, and my parents pointed out that I couldn't bring my lawnmowers with me to my dorm room because my roommate would probably murder me in my sleep if I did. And so I did what any enterprising young college student does, and I went on the university's job board, and I sorted the jobs by how much they paid, and I applied for the one at the very top, not knowing anything about it. And it happened to be a programming job, but I had never programmed before in my life. So I went in not really knowing what to expect, and I told them that I'd never really done it, and said I was very ready to learn and excited to try it out. And God knows what reason they did, but they gave me the job. And so I spent probably the first half of my university career learning to program and working at this tiny film company, building websites and things like that. But honestly, I never actually told anybody that I was a programmer. I was pretty embarrassed by it, and I didn't really have any friends who were programmers. Startups were not really coming of age back then at quite that time, and it was just something that I kept to myself. I mean, I was studying to be a lawyer, and a couple years went by, and one of my housemates at the time found out that I programmed and came running to my room when he did and said, "Hey, I'm going to this thing called a hackathon tomorrow. You've got to come with me." And at first I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never heard of a hackathon before. I never programmed outside my job, and he told me it was going to be this amazing marathon of programming and making cool stuff and sharing it with people. And it sounded like something that only elite programmers could do. And I didn't think of myself as a programmer in general anyway. And after a little bit of back and forth, he convinced me to go out to my first hackathon, and I was blown away by this amazing community of engineers, designers, makers, all giving up their weekend to make something cool and share it with the world. And I got hooked immediately. I remember I went home after that and crashed because I'd been up all night making my first project. And when I woke up, I looked myself in the mirror and said, that was the best experience of my life. I want to do whatever I can to be a part of this, for as long as possible. And so I've been dedicated to going to hackathons, participating in them, organizing them. And I built 2 companies now around helping to empower people in this community of hackers, specifically around hackathons, but even more broadly than that, to kind of join this community and level up and gain skills. And it's just been kind of a passion of mine, and I'm really happy to do it. And I kind of had a meandering path to get here, but I'm really proud to do it, and I'm really proud to be able to support as many people as we do every year now. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Eddie?
I went to school at Hampton University in Virginia. So I was a business major, like business management, just like general business studies, nothing really concentrated. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. So actually, after that, I went back to New England and lived in Boston and coached high school basketball and was worked at a charter school, the same place that I coached, and kind of picked up like management consulting gigs that my mom threw my way. So my mom is a 23-year practicing diversity and inclusion consultant. So I did that and decided I wanted to be in tech in New York. Maybe it was because I saw the Facebook movie. Tech looked really cool. And I was like, all right, yeah, I want to live in New York and I like tech. Seemed like a good place to go. And I stumbled upon a place called General Assembly. And I talked my way to a front desk gig at General Assembly back in 2012. And just kind of worked a bunch of odd jobs and helped different teams with different projects. And then converted to a full-time employee to work, ironically enough, in the career services department. So I was helping General Assembly graduates find and connect with employers after they graduated, mostly engineering jobs, design jobs, and product management jobs. So I did that for a good 2.5 years. I also picked up coding. And then after that, I had connected with a friend who was running recruiting at Genius. He was a sole recruiter, kind of doing everything. And he needed somebody to come in and as a contractor and focus on tech hiring specifically and help them hire their first product manager. So I did that. I left GA and contracted as a recruiter, first time doing like proper recruiting, hired the first PM, stolen from Google, take that Google. And we hired him and I stayed on to hiring technology. And then I brought into sales and video and I've been there for 2.5 years. So just recruiting, phone screening, all the funny, mythological things that go around the hiring practice. I'm happy to uncover for you.
Awesome. And how about you, Will?
So I definitely had an interesting way of getting into recruiting. I graduated in 2011. I went to a college called Stetson University and majored in finance. I kind of followed my mom. She worked in finance for a long time, and it was always interesting to me. When I graduated in 2011, there really weren't too many finance jobs that were out there. We were still kind of recovering from the recession. So I graduated and I went out with a couple of my friends, and a friend of a friend was a recruiter. And he told me, hey, I just started my own company. Would you want to join a tech startup? And I was like, yeah, tech startup. That sounds cool. Wound up being a staffing agency. So you'll learn a little bit more about that when you get out into the real world. But I worked completely on commission. So I had no salary, and I was, it was tough, but I'm kind of glad that I started my career like that. It really taught me how to work really hard, and nothing was really going to be given to me. So I worked with a lot of different kinds of technologies, different kinds of companies, and we grew that company to have about 15 people. And then I decided that I wanted to have my own company. So I quit my job and I started picking up my own clients, again in recruiting and headhunting. And then I brought in one of my friends who was looking for a job at the time. And we moved down to Miami, and we were literally recruiting from an apartment. I had clients all over the country. It was a lot of fun, but we weren't really scaling the business. So I decided that I wanted to join a company that was growing fast. At the same time, I wanted to go back to New York. So applied to a bunch of different jobs, and I wound up at Birchbox, which is an e-commerce company in the women's beauty and men's grooming vertical. It was a really great place. Had a lot of great experiences there and learned a lot. But they were going through a little financial trouble, and when you're a recruiter, you can kind of like sense that something bad's going to happen pretty ahead of most people. So I looked for a job, and I wound up at Peloton a little bit more than 2 years ago. Peloton at the time, not a lot of people had heard of the company. I think they had sold like 30,000 of their bikes by then. So when I joined, we had less than 20 engineers, and I was one of the first tech recruiters. Now we have 85 engineers. We're hoping to have 160 in the next 12 months. We've sold almost 230,000 bikes, so we've really grown. So it's been a really exciting time here, and I'm really happy at Peloton. It's a great place.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it seems like most of y'all have experiences like applying for jobs, maybe like with the exception of Swift, because it seems like you've kind of founded everything that you've been involved with. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, for the interview processes, like whether you were on the interviewing end or whether you were interviewing for a job or you were interviewing someone for the job, like how does that process start? Like, what do you recommend people start? They have the email saying you have this interview set up next Tuesday at 4. What are the first steps? And we can just switch it up. We'll start with Eddie.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So what should they do to start after they get the call back, setting up the first phone screen? I think most phone screens are like 30 minutes. If you're the person being interviewed, you kind of have to, it's probably good if you collect your thoughts about the way you want to talk about your experience before then. Because throughout the whole 30-minute call, you'll be asking questions. The recruiter will be talking a little bit. They'll probably get, I don't know, it depends on the interview, but 15 to 20 minutes to really go into detail around the things that you want to bring attention to around your experience. So they're going to ask you, they're going to have like prepared questions, and they're going to be like, okay, I know that I need this. I need to check these boxes on my candidate because I'm hiring this person for this opening. So you kind of got to hit those, check those boxes. So you should do your due diligence beforehand and really understand via the job description what it is that they think about, the things that they think are important for this particular opening. So you have to sort of hit those, hit those points when you talk about your experience. So, I mean, it's hard to not do that and kind of in a rambly, roundabout way to talk about your experience. So you should probably practice before then, not like literally do, practice phone screens, and unless you, have the ability to do that. But one way I found out is just sort of write down your experience. Write down your summary about the things that you feel are important to highlight in your experience and that speak specifically to the job that you're going for. So that you really can just talk about it in a concise way and make it easy for the recruiter to like take notes and write down, oh, here are all of the ways that they're like hitting the marks on this job that I'm trying to interview them for. So it's a good way to like practice your narrative around your experience, just kind of by writing it down beforehand, or even just, talking to your friends about it. Because it's a short interview and you kind of have to hit the marks given the time that, the recruiter asks you the questions. Don't talk about irrelevant things, and don't do a big roundabout way where you're going to like bore the recruiter to get to the answer what they were hoping to get for you to get to. So you should practice being tight and punchy in your narrative. I would recommend.
Yeah. Anything to follow, Will?
I think so. If you have an interview that's coming up, it's next week, or at the end of the week in a couple of days, I think the best thing you could do is just do your research, which sounds like pretty common, basic kind of knowledge. But I can't tell you how many people that I've gotten on the phone after they applied for one of our jobs, and they're just completely unaware of the job they applied for, what we do, which is kind of surprising. Like engineers, and you expect them to really do their homework, but a lot of times they don't. So if you're really interested in the company, learn about who they are, who are their customers, who are their clients, how do they make money, what are some of the challenges that they're going to run into. So understand that as much as you can. And of course, know yourself too. What are you going to bring to this company? What can you do? Instead of thinking of like your strengths and weaknesses, think about, a project that you've worked on and think about numbers around that project. Like, maybe you were in a club and you were recruiting for the club. Like you brought in 30 people to join the club or something like that. Like try to use data to kind of explain how you've been effective in your past positions.
Yeah, so to Swift, in your experience, most likely interviewing candidates, how can you tell that someone is really prepared for an interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to be fair, I actually did work as a programmer for probably 4 or 5 years professionally, and I was a developer evangelist for part of that as well for SendGrid. But yeah, I think that between my experience having interviewed for a lot of places and also having interviewed and phone screened many, many people, I think that that somebody has done their homework and prepared, like when they've done that research that Will was pointing out. I think the other thing I would mention there and just kind of add as an additional thought is doing the research on the person that you're talking to as well. It's a very different situation to be talking to the founder of a small startup that you're applying to versus a recruiter at potentially a very large company, like let's say you're interviewing at like Microsoft or IBM or something like that. They're going to have very different experiences and have very different things that they might be looking for. And honestly, somebody who's an experienced recruiter probably has a very different set of things they're looking for where they're interviewing candidates than an inexperienced interviewer like a founder of a early stage company might. Right. I think the other thing I would say is make sure that you're ready on time and maybe even be ready early. One thing that I have noticed quite frequently is that a lot of candidates will spend the first 2 to 3 minutes or even as long as 5 of their first phone screen just getting set up to actually have the phone screen. So if you 10 minutes before your call, go to a quiet place, make sure that your audio is working, make sure that you have your notes handy, make sure that you have reviewed your questions that you're going to ask, you've done a refresh on the company and the job, and just be there when the call is actually supposed to start. That'll go a long way towards just showing the interviewer that you're actually prepared, you care about this interview, and you put some thought into it. And especially if you have an understanding of who the person is, even being able to just mention that you've done your background research and point that out can be pretty useful. I think that the only other thing I'd say that wasn't already mentioned is probably just making sure that you think of some questions to ask in advance as well. Basically, the end of every interview that you're ever going to have, somebody is going to ask you, what questions do you have for me? And even if you don't actually have any questions, like thinking of some interesting things that you can bring up and talk about, and even just hear additional perspectives on, will demonstrate that you actually care about them and that you, have thought through the challenges or the things that you as a candidate or you as an employee might want to know. I mean, even asking somebody about what they like best about working for a company or why they joined might be a really good thing to kind of get a perspective on what it's like to work there and why people might choose to. But also demonstrate that you care about those kinds of cultural things as well. But I really think that the advice that Eddie and Will shared is fantastic, and it's exactly what I would recommend. I think preparing and practicing are definitely the 2 fundamentals here, and just making sure that you're ready for the questions that get asked of you.
Yeah, so I guess in preparing, once I kind of like entered the realm of tech, I started to notice that like all these companies have associated blogs. Which is a really good starting point for research. I was wondering if you had any other like extra suggestions, like if your friend was applying, what kind of resources would you throw to them and say like, hey, you need to check this out. Here's how you're going to learn more about this company to get a leg up in the process. We can start with Will.
Sure. So I think for us and any company that you're applying to that has a product, you should look at the users and try to understand what they're getting out of this company. So for us, we have people that buy our bike and, they're getting in shape. They're trying to feel better about themselves. They're trying to lose pounds. Everyone has their different reasons for it. But, understanding our users, I think, is so important because it's what keeps the lights on here. People love our product. We have a really high Net Promoter Score. They love telling people about their bike and what it's doing for them. So I would suggest, looking at the product and seeing customer reviews. I think that would be really cool if more people did that for me.
Anything to add, Eddie?
Yeah, definitely. Look at the current news of the company and see what's going on. If it's a startup, any announcements about big partnerships or funding or something, always give you good insight on the company. And something particular to the role you're going for is probably you should just go on LinkedIn and find who they already employ in that role, or that's similar to that role. So you can get a sense of who the team is that you tend to be working with. Even before the first phone screen, you can ask about them, like, the dynamic of the team, who am I working with, who am I, reporting to, that kind of thing. But you can go on LinkedIn and find these people already, look at their career trajectories and figure out how big the team is. And that will give you some good insight about, the kind of experience they're looking for this person to have, the kind of places that the people that they already employ come from. It could give you some insight about how you fit in or how you don't fit in, or what you need to highlight about your experience that's similar to the people that they already employ. Kind of stuff like that. LinkedIn's a good just treasure trove of information, for that kind of purpose.
Yeah. Anything to add, Swift?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just going a little deeper on what Eddie was saying, like, I think that is some of the best advice for somebody who's thinking about applying for a job at a company, to talk to people who actually work there. I mean, a hack that I often recommend to people in the MLH community is to actually reach out to somebody at the company, and without the prospect of saying I'm a potential candidate, but just say, hey, I'm interested in understanding more about what your company does and why it's cool. And I think depending on the size of the company, often that's the founder, and they can probably put you in touch with a more relevant person if it's depending on the size. But I honestly think just reaching out and having a conversation with somebody about what's cool about the company in advance will give you a leg up on just about every other person who's interviewing. I think the other thing I would say, if you're part of a large community of other developers, designers, makers, or anybody, honestly, asking the people in your community for information about what the interview process is like, or what it is like to work at the company and potentially people do, is really useful. Something we see very frequently in the Major League Hacking community is different community members asking for tips when they're about to go interview somewhere. So somebody might be like, hey, I'm interviewing at company X. Has anybody interviewed there before? What was your experience like? Anything I should know? And then you'll see threads of different people responding and sharing their advice and feedback and thoughts about the process, or even seeing people who actually work with those companies jump in on those threads and say, I actually work there now, and here's why it's great. Here's what you should be thinking about too. So I think using your network is honestly something that can be really valuable and insightful too, and can give you some insight into the interview process itself that I think might be really useful when you're going into it.
Yeah, so on the topic of preparation, how do you go about preparing for a technical interview? We can start right back up with Swift.
Yeah, this is one I think that is really interesting. There's a lot of different kinds of technical interviews, and I think that understanding what the type of interview is probably the single most important thing to do from the start. I mean, just some classic examples, right? Like, you could have something like a whiteboarding interview where they're going to pose different programming problems to you and expect you to like pseudocode or actually code them out. You might have an interview where you've done a take-home project and you're reviewing your technical take-home project with a developer. You might have a pair coding session where you're pair programming on a project with another engineer. There's like a variety of different types of technical interviews that could come up, and understanding what the actual type of interview is and the format is number one, right? So as soon as you get scheduled for the interview, if the information is not presented immediately, asking those questions and making sure you understand is the first thing I would do. I think the second thing I would do is practice. This is honestly the single biggest mistake that I see hackers making in our community, and I think that it's a mistake that I fell into many times when I was interviewing as well. Honestly, interviewing is a muscle. The more you work it out and the more you practice and test yourself, the better you're going to get. And if you don't use it, it fades, and you're going to have to rebuild it the next time you go out. Go out, buy yourself one of those coding interview practice books. There's tons of them out there, and find a friend and honestly spend a couple nights a week practicing and interviewing each other around those potential problems. That'll help you practice in a low stress, low stakes environment, and you'll also have fun while you're doing it. Actually, I was home for the holidays, a couple months ago, and one of my family members is interviewing for programming jobs, and our whole family was actually running through programming interview questions around the kitchen table, which was a ton of fun. And it reminded me exactly why this is so important, you know? I think that honestly, the more you do those things and the more you rehearse them, and the better off you're going to be. And the example of like some of the other interview types, so like pair programming, for example, I honestly think that this still holds true here. And you know, if you don't have a friend who's readily available in your, you know, local physical community to work with on the practice for interviews, tapping into some of the online communities. I know there's a ton of Facebook groups for people who are potential job searchers, who, you know, might want to pair up with you and work with you remotely, and some stuff could be interesting as well. There's a ton of amazing tools out there where people can actually use them to practice interviewing, and even do some rehearsal interviews with people. I know that, you know, a popular one that I've heard of is, you know, interviewing.io. I know that there's a bunch of other ones out there. HackerRank comes to mind. You know, tons of different stuff. So you can go out and try some of those and you know, test your skills and do some practice interviews too. But I think those would be my main tips: is, you know, understand the format and make sure that you practice the mechanics that you're going to be using during the format of that interview.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Eddie?
Yes. Definitely co-sign what Mike was saying. You have to practice beforehand. Yeah, really whoever the, you know, the recruiter who you're talking to before the actual interview, really understand what kind of technical interview it is. You don't want to like be surprised and get, you know, punched in the face when you're like, oh, I thought I was whiteboarding. Like, oh, you know, open up your text editor and we're coding. Like, you should really know what it is. It's going to be more, you know, if it's going to be more sort of algorithmic, is it going to be more, I don't know, like a bigger design question? You should really understand. And at Genius, we do a lot of, when we do technical interviewing, it's all just sort of like vanilla programming. So when we're a Rails stack, so we often interview Ruby developers, you know, or people that are fluent enough with Ruby to, you know, come in on the job at Genius and provide value from the beginning. So whatever the interview style is, you know, once you get that, understand and practice for that. You know, another one that I would mention, that Interview Cake is a cool one. They do like weekly or monthly emails or bi-weekly emails with just like just cool practice questions. And then once you decide what the interview is and you're like, okay, I'm going to use Ruby, I'm going to use Python, or, you know, whatever, revisit like all of the idioms of your chosen programming language. Because one of the things that our technical interviewers check for is fluency with code. If this is your chosen programming language, if you're telling me that you're proficient in this, like, you should know all of, like, you know, like, you should be coding very idiomatically, all of like the built-in methods of functions. Like, you should know the ins and outs of your programming language of choice. And then you're using it to solve whatever the coding problem is. You know, that's a big important thing that we look for when candidates say that they're good at a particular programming language. You know, so that's, yeah, and just practice, just cram. Like, yeah, it's not, interviewing just like a natural thing. You have to cram for it and just do it. It's, you know, it's ugly and it's a necessary evil. So just do as much as you can for the actual interview, because on the job, you're clearly going to do more practical things that has nothing to do with, you know, a reverse tree traversal or something. I don't know what, you know, what these companies are going to ask you, but learn you know, do a deep dive in your studies for the purposes of the interview. But programming language fluency is big.
Yeah. And do you have anything to add, Will?
Sure. So for us, we actually put together a packet to send to candidates so that they could, you know, be prepared. A lot of what we tell candidates was mentioned already, but you know, we suggest interviewcake.com. Interviewing.io is actually a company we work with. LeetCode.com is another website that you should check out. Topcoder.com is another one. And also a lot of times now, every company, you know, they want to think that they're going to hire people that are coming from Google or at like the Google kind of level. Like, you hear it a lot. It's pretty funny. Everyone thinks they're the next Google. So if you actually go on Google.com, you could Google the technical interview prepared packet that Google has. So they'll tell you how to prepare for their interview, the whiteboarding. You know, a lot of companies are going to mirror this now. So why not prepare for their interview? And there's a lot of books that are out there about preparing for Google's interviews. So you could check that out too. And I think, I think that could really put you ahead of a lot of your peers.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we're getting quite the number of audience questions, so I'm just going to start to kind of ask them. The first one being from Jared in our community. What's the best way to prepare for a case style interview? Whoever, we could start, if anybody has like any expertise on this.
Yeah, so I think for us, we have case studies for our product manager interviews. So I think the people that are the most successful are the ones that really go above and beyond what's expected of them. So, you know, it's one thing to have a project or a case study that you need to do for an interview, and you take an hour and you stab at it and you put together 5 slides and you come in and you're ready to present. You know, we've had people that have gone so far as like creating wireframes and mock-ups, and they're doing user personas, and like, you know, they're like ready to, these are for product roles. They're ready to like work with an engineering team and like put something out there. And then there's people that come in there and they interview, and, you know, they have a few bullets that they could talk about on their PowerPoint slide and what they might do. So that really sets apart a lot of our successful candidates to unsuccessful candidates.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything to add to that? Eddie or Swift?
I think the only thing I would add is asking a lot of questions. So we use like a case style interview in almost every single interview that we do here at Major League Hacking across all of our roles, whether they're technical or non. And often it's just a series of, you know, pose, background information. And usually the interviewer actually has a lot more information they could share. And the best performing candidates usually ask a ton of questions and kind of suss out that information to understand really the mechanics of the problem, and to honestly have an advantage when they're answering them. Like, you may not necessarily need that background information to get to the correct answer, but certainly having it will give you a better perspective than you know, somebody who doesn't. I think that, you know, making sure you dig, making sure you really understand what the person is asking and really understand what they're getting at and what the challenge specifically is, I think is honestly the foundation of being able to answer those questions really, really well. And I mean, that comes back to like any interviewing though, right? If somebody is asking you a question, really making sure that you understand what they're asking you and what they're trying to learn, and you know, any of the kind of frameworks or constraints that they're offering you, is going to be the difference between, you know, an adequate answer and a really great one, right? And so honestly, asking clarifying questions throughout the interview process, whether it's whiteboarding or a case style interview or just a you know, standard back and forth kind of Q&A style interview, I think it's really important. And I think a lot of candidates actually don't use it as much as they could, and it would give them a significant advantage if they used it more.
Yeah, Eddie,
yeah.
To add.
I would say, yeah, I mean, when they give you like a case style interview or whatever the problem is, and they give you like the premise, a lot of companies make it vague purposefully. So I definitely, you know, piggyback off of Mike and Will, and they want to see if you're going to parse it out. And then the more that you parse it out, you know, they'll let you know. They'll tell you if it's like, okay, I can't tell you anymore. Like, you should keep asking questions if you need to understand, you know, like the context of what a good solution would be. So keep parsing it out as much as possible. And we've used case interviews for like product roles and sales roles. And, you know, the best performing candidates are usually ones that they understand what the question is, and they've built a deck or a thing, whatever the thing that they're going to do to present to us. You know, it's bold. It has like conviction. It's not something that they're saying because they think we want to hear them say it. So don't fall into that trap to where it's like, you know, you're just like, is this what you want? Is this what you want me to do? Just be like, okay, well, you know, I have convictions about this direction for the thing that I'm presenting to you. If we have differences here, this is, you know, here's why I back up. Here's why I'm creating an argument for my thing. Like, that's good. That's a healthy thing. You know, you're not going to scream at them or throw a chair, but like some back and forth is good because they want to see that you have whatever your experience is that you're bringing to the table. that you have convictions to back up why you feel this way about this kind of directions as in your solution. So that was big for sales and product candidates that I've interviewed. So, definitely don't just tell them what you think they want you to hear, I would say.
Yeah, the next question comes from Brianna from our community. She asks, what are the best tips for phone interviews? I always feel like I struggle when there's no face-to-face feedback. The tell me about yourself question, how can I best utilize this? Is it a more in-depth rehash of my resume, or should I offer more personal interests / details as well? And we can start with, I remember you were talking, Eddie, earlier about kind of laying out what to talk about. So what are you kind of expecting when you ask somebody, so tell me about yourself?
I don't know. I feel like it's a very nerve-wracking question, right? It's so open and vague. Like, what do you mean? Like, what movie did I see lately? Like, you don't even know. I wouldn't even, that sounds cruel, honestly. I wouldn't do that to a candidate. Oh, just tell me about yourself, and then just see where they take you at it. I don't know. That seems kind of weird. But I would be more like pointed and be like, tell me about your current day-to-day and your role as something. But if they're saying, tell me about yourself, I kind of feel like that's where they want you to go. So you should probably start with what it is you're doing in your current position, at your current employer, or at your most recent employer, most recent position. And you should go into the day-to-day about, what were your main responsibilities, and how you did those things well, and why they made a good impact on your department and your company. And then kind of like go, I think chronologically, sort of backwards, start with your most recent work experience, and then talk about prior to that, I did this role, that kind of thing, and then before that, I did this kind of role. So it feels like there's sort of a structured narrative around that. For me, as a recruiter, it makes it easy for me to take notes and stuff. And then for you, it just sounds like you've kind of collected your thoughts. But if they're being like purposely vague, just go to professional stuff. Don't go into like, I like rock climbing. Don't go into that unless they ask you about it.
What about you, Will, since you're also on the recruiting side?
Yeah, so I think if someone asked me that, I'd probably ask them a question. So tell me about yourself. I'd be like, is there something like specific you'd want to hear more about my education, my past role, and see how that goes? I think for me as a recruiter, if I ask someone, tell me about like your experience in this role, or tell me about, what you were doing in your most recent role. The worst thing to do is, you've looked at your phone or you looked at your watch and you've realized you've been speaking for like 10 minutes and you don't get to ask, they haven't even asked the second question. I think the longest time, and I remember timing it, I asked someone, tell me about your work experience, like pretty like standard question. So it was something like that. I think someone spoke for almost 40 minutes. And I was like looking at my phone, like I was like, at that point, I'm like, I want to see how much longer this will happen. That was like pretty extreme, but it's always good to like kind of be mindful of that. Recruiters, they're probably talking to 10 people, not 10, but maybe anywhere like 5, 6, 7 people a day, potentially, maybe 10 if they're like really hiring aggressively. So they want to like understand like the most important aspects about your experience. So I would really try to own in on that personally.
Yeah. Anything to add, Mike?
I think I'll focus on the first part of the question around the phone interviews specifically, because I think that's something that's really interesting. I definitely understand the idea of like, being in person and having that feedback loop of being able to look at somebody and see that they're following what you're saying and that they're still engaged. And you definitely lose that when you're, on the phone and you can't use visual cues to kind of tell you how the conversation is going. A trick that I often use that I think is very useful is to ask questions to confirm comprehension and confirm that the person is following. So as an example, I might say something like, does that make sense? Just to confirm the person heard what I was saying and understood what it was. It also allows them to segue into other questions if they have them. And that's specifically very useful in those kind of open-ended ones, like tell me about yourself. Because that'll allow the person, once they've gotten the detail that they need out of you, to kind of break it off naturally. Often I think that people are just too polite and don't want to like wrap up a line of conversation, even though they might have limited time, just out of politeness. I think if you're an experienced recruiter, you probably can combat that pretty easily. But for more inexperienced recruiters or people whose day-to-day is has another job beyond the recruiting aspect, that might not come as naturally. So I think those clarifying questions are really important. And then I also think, every once in a while, just asking some kind of follow-up question to their question that requires them to give you a response will also help you confirm that people are following on and still engaged with you. So as an example, say that somebody asked you, about your typical programming stack and what tools you use, you might flip that around and say, I'm curious, what kind of tools and stack do you use at your company? And that could give them an opportunity to speak and also demonstrate engagement and have you confirm that they're still following what you're saying and they're still engaged too.
Yeah, awesome. We have another few questions. Randall from our community asks, what are some things that make you go, yes, let's hire this person, or let's invite this person back for another interview? Do you have any go-to questions? Any favorite go-to interview questions that you personally like to ask? And do you have any questions that you love when candidates ask you at the end of an interview?
I guess I'll go. So I think out of those questions presented, what I like hearing from candidates the most, and it changes a lot. It's like what aspects of your company might you not like, or if you could change anything, what would it be? And that's like a very deep I'm like, wow, I need to usually think about that. And depending on the month or the quarter, it changes, or the day. We're always looking for room for improvement. So I think that's always important. And, you're going to be spending a lot of time. Obviously, you're spending a significant portion of your life in the next place that you're going to be working. So you want to ask these questions and you want to understand, what might not be the most shiny and things that you hear, the shiny things and things that you might hear that are good about that company. And you can catch some people off guard and they might be honest. I remember when I graduated from college, I personally asked someone that question when I was interviewing in a few different places, and I got a very dark answer. So you that's a good one to ask, I would say.
Eddie, do you want to add anything to that? Again, the questions are, what's something that makes you want to hire this person in an interview? What are your favorite go-to interview questions, and any questions you love to be asked at the end?
I don't know if I have any silver bullet, questions. It's just, oh, wow, you've unlocked, I'm gonna hire you. I don't have one of those questions. But for me, it's if the candidate is already, I don't know, depends on the role, but if the candidate is already doing the job that I want them to do for me, that's a great thing that I'd like to see. But outside of that, you can't really control for that, right? But a good thing is that most recruiters, what candidates who have asked me, it's really impressed me is, towards the end when they're asking, questions and I'm answering questions about the company or the next steps or the interview process and stuff. And they're like, well, are there any concerns about my background that I can, answer for you right now? I can address about my experience or anything like that, and they ask that towards the end of the phone screen or the in-person interview. And it's kind of recruiters are going to know that, right? Because they're thinking about it, they're taking notes, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't know if, there's a gap here, or there's something, I'm unsure about here. You're like, listen, if you have any of those questions, let me address that for you right now. That's brought candidates back from, oh, I think this person might not be good, to well, actually, you know what? They made a good argument and they addressed my concerns right in the same call. So I think I'm actually going to move them to the next stage. That's always a cool thing to do.
Yeah, Swift, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I think that, Eddie and Will might be able to speak to this as professional recruiters a little bit more than I can. But I think something we do at Major League Hacking is use very templated high-level questions, and then we do a lot of digging around the actual responses to those questions to take the conversation where it goes naturally. So honestly, when it comes to go-to interview questions, the go-to interview questions are the questions that we've set in advance and know that we're going to ask, right? And I think that asking those similar questions and using digging and depth around them as a way to kind of understand a candidate and who they are and what they've been doing and working on is really useful from a comparison standpoint, but it also like kind of eliminates that idea of like the silver bullet question that somebody could just pull out and be like, yeah, I'm going to hire this person, right? I think that the things that, I naturally look for are people who demonstrate a higher level of comprehension. And I think asking some of those tough questions, like around challenges or around, things that are, potentially sticky points with the company, demonstrates a higher level of understanding of the challenges of the business, as well as like the challenges that you might face as an employee. And I think if you're capable of understanding what those are and asking them during an interview, that is certainly something that would stand out to me. I think that often, as a founder of a company, I get a lot of the same questions. A lot of people ask me about the origin story of the company and my vision for it and like those kinds of things. And, so I would just be aware that going into an interview, with a founder, a lot of people probably ask those same questions, and that shouldn't preclude you from asking the question yourself. But I think you might get a more scripted response if it's something that's more common than something that is a little bit more off the cuff or a little bit of a tougher question in general. But, honestly, my imagination says that a lot of interviews that you'll encounter tend to follow a specific pattern, and kind of recognizing what those patterns are as a candidate can give you a pretty strong advantage in knowing how to take the interview and follow that flow.
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I was doing research just about interviewing in general, I guess a common mistake that a lot of folks ask is they forget to actually ask for the job, which I had never actually heard of until I did my research regarding this. So I guess what made me think of this is, Eddie, you were saying when folks ask you, when they want to clarify on maybe if there's like a gap, like stuff like that, and they elaborate it, and it kind of like pushes their application up to the next level. For folks that do have that like gap or whatever, like how can you kind of explain that in an interview? You want to elaborate? Yeah.
Oh, once you ask the question and then the interviewer tells you.
So if you're asked, yeah, like you see that there's a gap in their employment, you're kind of confused about that. They ask you, is there anything else I can elaborate on for you? And then you say, yeah, can you tell me more about this gap in your resume? So what is the best way for someone to answer that? And this is also, somebody asked this in our community as well. Yeah.
Oh, you mean like a timeline, employment timeline gap?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Okay. When I said earlier, I was like, is there anything that I can explain more in terms of are there any concerns around my experience that I can address and speak a little bit more to convince you more that I'm a great candidate? Mm-hmm. You're talking about employment gaps. What's the best way to address that? I don't know. It depends on how bad it is, honestly. I mean, I don't know. My thing with gaps is like, companies do favor, like the best candidate is probably already employed and they're leaving their company to come work at yours, right? That's kind of ideal because this person's like working every day and their skills are like fresh and they can just kind of leave their company, take 2 weeks or something and kind of come in and sort of minimal ramp up in training, depending on like the department, the role, that kind of stuff, right? So when you're talking to a candidate that maybe has been looking for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months. Your skills are perceived to be not as fresh, I guess, honestly, from the company, right? Because you got to think like if you have a 6 month gap from your last job to this company that you're talking to right now, you're competing for this opening against other candidates that are already that don't have gaps or are currently employed or are ready to like hit the ground running, like right from where they are, versus you may be a little bit more rusty or something. So I guess, I don't know, you can't like, I don't know, there's no like magic explanation to where you can just wave it away, but you can speak about, just give, if there's a gap for personal reasons, you can, divulge as much as you're comfortable with. You don't necessarily need to get into all of the details, but talk about how you've still been active and talk about how, I guess you can combat the fears of the gap with like asking really good questions, doing your research on the company, and being able to really talk about your experience in a poignant way. But I don't know, the gap is just like, it really depends. It's very contextual, right? So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I think for me, when I see a gap on someone's resume, as a recruiter, like I personally don't really dig into it that much. I think that'd be kind of mean. Everyone has their personal reasons. If I had to explain it, I would be very, I'd be very brief in this explanation. I wouldn't really just go really deep dive into it and explain like all the personal details of why I had to take this time off. I've had that happen before, and it's just kind of like an awkward kind of situation. So, I'm like, okay, so let's move on. I'm sorry to hear about that, or, that's unfortunate. Everyone has, reasons for this. I think the best way to kind of combat it is, if you're an engineer, even though I was not working at that time, I still contributed to open source, or, I still tried to stay up to date as much as I could. I think kind of focusing more on how you, how you're still a good candidate, I think is more important than, sharing any kinds of details of why you might have had to take time off.
Yeah, anything to add to that, Swift?
No, not really. I mean, that's all really sound advice, and honestly, it is a very contextual and personal situation for many people. So, I think it really depends.
Yeah, so I guess similarly, like with the gap question or things that may kind of bring up questions in the interview, how do you handle the topic of being discharged from a previous position? Swift, anything?
I think that's also a very tough situation. I think that honestly, it is so specific to the person's situation that I think it can be really, really difficult one to deal with. I think that I wouldn't lie. I think that's the number one mistake that I can recommend against, and that I think does come out pretty quickly, especially for companies where they do reference checks. And almost every company that you'll work for that has a solid recruiting process will do reference checks and confirm what you have told them is actually true, especially around like your most recent employment. I think avoiding any lies or anything that can get you caught, in a lie is certainly just the one tip that I can share there. That, but as far as how to explain those situations, I think that each one has such a specific circumstance. I think the other thing I might actually throw in there is to avoid bad mouthing past employers, regardless of how the situation. I was thinking about before this was kind of some of the best and worst interview experiences that I had personally seen. And I think that, something that really quickly turns me off on a candidate and might lead me to a no pretty quickly is seeing somebody who doesn't necessarily have respect for the other people they've encountered in their career, even if it was something that, quite frankly, wasn't a great situation for them. I think having professionalism and taking the high road is something that demonstrates the maturity of a candidate that we would want to hire here at Major League Hacking, and I'm sure that many companies would want to hire as well. And that goes beyond just former employers as well, as it can go back to people you've worked with, past projects you've worked on, even other people that you've interviewed with, and not kind of taking a negative or bad mouthing approach to those too. But as far as how to handle the specific situation, I think it's very personal and very specific to the individual.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything to add to that? I guess the main thing that I do from that is just like paint the situation in a positive light, essentially.
Yeah. I would say, just off. If you were, if you left the company, there's a difference between being laid off or being let go for performance issues. Even if you were let go because of performance issues, it's not an automatic disqualifier, So you shouldn't, be afraid to talk about it. Definitely, to Mike's point, be honest about it. Talk about. Don't badmouth your employer. Obviously, you gain nothing by doing that. But just be honest about it. Talk about what you learned from the situation, and I guess what you would do differently next time. But the fact of being fired from a past employer does not automatically disqualify you from getting this new job that you're interviewing for. So don't feel like you're hopeless or something.
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions too, are definitely very credible and something that you should be concerned about. But I think like a good company wouldn't really dig too deep into that. And that's like another question. Like if you're like talking to a company and they're like, you know, what were you doing for this year and why'd you get fired? Like maybe you don't want to work there. It's like something else to consider.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm just gonna kind of open it to like, how do you manage to stay calm during the interview process, and just any last words of advice for the folks that are viewing right now? I guess we'll start with Swift.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, coming back to something we've said several times before, practice makes perfect in this case, right? Like the more you interview, the more you go through these questions, the more you have experience actually answering them, the better you're going to be under pressure. And honestly, you know, the better you're going to perform during the interview. I think other tips around staying calm is speak slowly. I mean, it's the same thing with public speaking in general, right? Is you're probably speaking faster than, you know, you are interpreting yourself talking, and you slowing down a little bit, using some breathing techniques might actually help you perform better in the interview as well. I think, you know, closing advice, interviewing is tough, and you know, honestly, nobody is an expert in it until they've got a job, and by then they've forgotten about it too, because, you know, quite frankly, it's not a problem for them anymore. It's just something that you got to keep at, and it's something that you know, you got to be willing to tackle from all angles. I think the thing to remember is that, you know, there are a lot of really great companies out there that are not like your name brand top 10 tech companies, right? And working for them, it can be just as valuable and rewarding experience, if not more so, in many ways. And I would certainly encourage everybody in this community and you know, ours at Major League Hacking to go and explore and find some of the organizations that are working on problems that they're interested in and passionate about, and find a way to contribute to those organizations, you know, no matter what the size and stage they're at. Certainly, I think that there are many, many opportunities out there, and technical talent is in high demand. And so you as a, you know, candidate definitely has a lot of power and choice in terms of where you go to work and you know, the things you get to work on. You know, I think another thing that we didn't really talk about is just kind of getting yourself ready for an interview like months and months and months in advance, and kind of things you should be doing. But I would say working on personal projects and making sure that you're contributing to open source, going to hackathons is another really great one. You know, just making sure that you're working on code, reading code, and you know, engaged as a developer quite a bit. Will definitely make sure that you're prepared for those interviews, and that you're you know, a standout candidate, and that you're doing really great. So yeah, I think those are my tips on staying calm and how to you know, make sure that you're ready for the best possible technical interview you can give.
Yeah. And then we can, Will, anything to add?
Yeah, one of our instructors here, and our instructors are in front of people, broadcasting to, you know, hundreds, potentially thousands of people each day, hopefully a lot more in the future. But they told me before what they do, they talk to themselves in the mirror before they do the class, and you know, that like really relieves stress. So I think that's like something that I've done. You know, I've been doing like talks here and there the past few weeks, and that's like really been helping me. Another thing that I like, you know, you could just take deep breaths. Like if you're ever nervous, just like take a deep breath and just count to 3. And then, you know, you can do this in your head, not out loud. But that always, you know, would calm me down. And, you know, a word of advice, I think, like, you know, at the end of the day, like, you shouldn't put so much pressure on yourself. Like, you're going to find a good job. You're going to find a place where you're going to have a good career. You know, I think these days, like, we just had an engineer that quit, and he's like starting his own company. And I talked to him. I was like, you know, why are you doing this? It's like, I'm turning 25 next week. I'm like, oh no. You know, like there's always like a reason to start a company, and there's always a reason to you know, try to shoot super high. But, you know, just like be conscious and be mindful of just like live in the moment. I think, like, you know, you'll all end up in a good spot. You know, I'm definitely confident about that. But, you know, just know, like, I think it's like a Steve Jobs quote. I hate, like, you know, quoting Steve Jobs or anything like that. But, you know, looking at the dots from when you're ahead it's much easier to connect the dots. Something like that. I think about that sometimes.
Yeah. Anything else to add, Eddie?
They Mike and Will, they covered a lot of it. They, you know, they gave you a pep talk too. I would say that yeah, I don't know, to stay calm. I think you're the calmest when you just feel like you're prepared. you know. So whatever preparation is for whatever the job that you're going for, you know, don't wait to the last minute to do it. I know everybody's busy, but like, when you feel like you're prepared, you know, you're just more confident in the actual interview, you know. So that means going back over your experience, doing the research of the company, and it's just sort of doing your best. I guess I would say, yeah, I don't know. When you're going for the job, you're either, if it's a job that requires experience and you have experience, like it aligns or it really doesn't, right? And that's what the recruiter or the company is really trying to figure out. Like there are things that you can do in the interview that like, you know, you can do that will sort of do well for you, or that will kind of like ding you in the interview. But at the end of the day, it's really about the alignment of what the job, what the role requires and what the company's looking for. And it's not always just sort of personally you just being bad at it or something. You know what I mean? So more or less, it's the larger alignment for what the company needs, you know, in terms of the level, what the company's going to be, you know, sort of doing with the role. And it's less like you said hello the wrong way in the phone. And it's like, you know, it's not that kind of stuff. It's just bigger. So it's kind of like, just don't think about, oh, if I had only, you know, said this one thing, or if I said this weird, and it's not that. That's not the thing that's like, you know, making it so that you don't get the offer. If that makes any sense.
Thank you so much. We're just about out of time. We had so many questions. Apologies in advance for not being able to get to all of them. I just want to ask for our community, would it be okay for them to kind of follow up with you regarding any questions that they may have about interviewing? Is that okay? And if so, what's the best way for them to contact you if this is all right?
Sure. You could email me. My email is will@onepeloton.com.
Cool.
Yeah, and totally the same for me as well. My email is swift@emilish.io. I'm also on Twitter, SwiftAlpha1. And you know, you feel free to join the MLH communities on Facebook or Slack, and we're happy to answer questions there as well.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm Eddie, EDDIE @genius.com. So, you know, hit me up.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all taking time to do this. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next panel, which is negotiating salary and benefits, April 18th. See y'all there.
Bye.
Thank you.